Okay. Wow, this is more than just a little bit weird. This is my first time vlogging, and I am just a little nervous and feeling like everybody is staring at me, which they probably are. In fact, there's someone walking by right now who's laughing. That's not a good start. Hey, I'm Joe Arvai, director of the Wrigley Institute at the University of Southern California. The Wrigley Institute is part academic unit where we train the next generation of environmental leaders. It's part research center, and it's part think tank. Oh, and we have a campus on Catalina Island, which is super cool. Now, I'm a behavioral scientist. I work on how people think and act or don't act when it comes to all kinds of environmental issues. And for that reason, I spend a lot of my time these days working on climate change. Now, when I first started working on climate change, going back to about, 20 years ago or so, I had this great sense of optimism, and a lot of the people I worked with were optimistic too. We felt like we'd be able to get our arms around the problem, wrestle it to the ground, and be able to do some good. Well, things have changed. Over the past few years, it seems like most everything we hear about climate change in the media is negative. It's doom and gloom, and the emphasis is really on the fact that we're screwed. And if that's the message you keep getting, from a psychological perspective, it's really easy to give up. If you feel like there's nothing you can do to make things better, then why bother even trying? Our optimism just melts away. And the truth is, at a time like this, for a situation like this, kind of giving up is the absolute last thing we ought to do. Now, over the course of my work, I've encountered all kinds of things that give me reason to be hopeful that we'll actually be able to do something to address the risks of climate change, which is what brings us here today. We're in a small town outside of Zurich, Switzerland, and we're here to look at this. See it back there behind me, but it is a prototype CO2 capture facility. So we know that carbon dioxide accounts for more than 75% of the greenhouse gases that end up in the atmosphere and ultimately are responsible for climate change. And we also know that the majority of that carbon dioxide comes from human activities, things like agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. Now, what the facility behind me does is it pulls CO2 out of the air around us so that it can't actually contribute to climate change. The way it works is the equipment is basically a box with a filter inside of it and a fan on the outside of it. The fan draws air into the unit. CO2 from that ambient air gets stuck to the filter inside. When that filter gets saturated with CO2, the box is closed, and then it's heated up to around 100 degrees centigrade. When it gets that hot inside, the filter material releases the CO2 back into the box, at which point it can be vacuumed out and put into one of the storage tanks that you can see on the ground behind me. Now, from there, the CO2 can be used in a variety of different ways. It can be piped to a greenhouse that's just over there. It can be pulled out, and the carbon can be extracted and used to make things. So you can use the carbon in the captured carbon dioxide to make polymers, the base material for plastics. You can even, if you're clever enough, pull the carbon out and make completely carbon neutral hydrocarbon-based fuels, the kinds of fuels that we would use in a car or in an airplane. Or in the worst case scenario, you could just take that CO2 and pump it underground or into the deep ocean, pulling it out of the atmosphere and storing it away for centuries. So you might ask yourself at this point, well, if you have to heat the box up to 100 degrees centigrade, isn't that horribly inefficient? And the truth is, if you had to heat it for no reason, the answer would be yes. But in this particular case, the facility that is underneath that carbon capture unit actually generates a lot of waste heat that would otherwise just be released into the atmosphere. So what the people who are running this prototype are doing is using the heat from this facility to actually heat up the box. So no extra energy needs to be put in to the system to get the CO2 out of the filter. Now, what I really like about this technology is that it's pretty innocuous. When I first heard about carbon capture technology, I thought the equipment needed to do it would be absolutely huge. But To tell you the truth, if I was going by this facility and didn't know what carbon capture was and looked up on the roof over there, I wouldn't have believed that there's equipment up there that can actually help slow down the effects of climate change. Now, it's worth noting that this technology is far from perfect. My biggest criticism of it is that it doesn't really do anything to accelerate the process of decarbonization, the process by which we do things that don't put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in the first place. But on the bright side, those kinds of things are happening, and the pace at which they're happening is already speeding up. We're getting better at producing energy without having to burn things, and we're getting better at moving ourselves via transportation without emitting greenhouse gases. And for me, personally, more than just buying time, technologies like this offer me hope. Hope that we can fix things before climate change gets really out of hand. Hope. I need that. And I have a feeling more than just a few of you need it too.